Mega Mega Shock Neo Geo!
Garou 伝説スペシャル
SNK.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to Player One Start. So today, in another offshoot video of the Ultimate Neo Geo review, I'm going to go ahead and dive into another iconic fighting franchise that started and kind of ended on the Neo Geo itself, and that is the Fatal Fury franchise. This game spawned a very lucrative series for SNK, and it also included a spin-off series that is still going to this day, known as The King of Fighters. And if you haven't seen my video on the King of Fighters series, I'll leave a link in the description below, and you can watch it before or after this video. The choice is up to you. But that said, let's go ahead and dive into Fatal Fury. Fatal Fury began development at SNK in the early 1990s. The game was designed by Takashi Nishiyama, the creator of the original Street Fighter at Capcom in 1987. Fatal Fury was envisioned as a spiritual successor to Street Fighter, and was developed around the same time that Street Fighter II was being developed, both releasing in 1991. And while the Street Fighter series would move in a different direction, putting more emphasis on combos, Fatal Fury's gameplay would focus more on the timing of special moves as well as storytelling. Fatal Fury has the distinction of being SNK's first fighting game for the Neo Geo system, and served as the inaugural game in the Fatal Fury series, as well as the first game to depict the fictional King of Fighters tournament, which later became the basis for the King of Fighters series. Many of SNK's mainstay characters, including the Bogard brothers Terry and Andy, along with their friend Joe Higashi, and their nemesis Geese Howard, would make their debut in this game. This game would provide backstory for what would eventually become the series' lead characters, with Terry and his younger brother being orphans who raised themselves on the streets until they were adopted by Jeff Bogard. At a young age, both Terry and Andy witnessed the brutal murder of their adoptive father at the hands of Geese Howard. Knowing that they needed more training to confront Geese, the brothers took an oath to spend a decade to fine-tune their martial arts skills before trying to avenge their father. 10 years later into the present day, the crime lord has organized a tournament known as the King of Fighters. Andy and Terry reunite after years of being apart, and after going to pay their respects at their adoptive father's grave, they encounter and befriend the Japanese martial arts champion Joe Higashi, and they enter the King of Fighters tournament to face off against Geese. At the beginning of the game, the player is given the option to select one fighter, which is either Terry, Andy, or Joe. Then you select your first opponent. Victorious players will then play against the other fighters, eventually before fighting Geese himself. The gameplay follows the typical formula of most fighting games. The player competes against their opponent in a best of 2 out of 3 matches. The player uses the joystick and 3 attack buttons, which will allow you to punch, kick, and throw. Each of the playable characters have special techniques that are performed by inputting specific commands in combination with the joystick and buttons. The input methods for special moves are shown to the player during the course of the game after every bonus round, as opposed to being given on an instruction card on the game's cabinet. Perhaps the most unique aspect of Fatal Fury were the addition of 2 lane battles. Many stages featured 2 rows, a background row and a foreground row. Players can change between rows at any other time than in the single-player mode, where they have to wait for the CPU opponent to change rows before they can. When a second player joins in the middle of a one-player fight, instead of postponing the current battle for a match between the 2 players, the game will allow both players to team up against the current CPU opponent in a 2-on-1 match before their battle takes place. After every second match in the single-player tournament, the player will participate in a bonus round minigame involving an arm wrestling match against a machine. To win in these mini-games, you have to press the A button as fast as you can. This game was a commercial and critical success for SNK upon its release. However, in retrospect, reviews have not been as kind. When comparing it to Street Fighter II, for example, a lot of reviewers have said that there is not much different in this game, except for the fact that you can have a 2-on-1 fight against a CPU opponent if you choose to. Overall, I did feel this game is entertaining and a good first entry for a series that would morph into something more iconic. However, the lack of playable characters and the very short storyline was something that would make me not recommend this game to everyone today, except for to say that, hey, I own the first Fatal Fury game.
Special!
And you know what success does for a video game? Well, it spawns sequels. The first sequel, Fatal Fury 2, was released in 1992, just 1 year after the first game. This game was notable for introducing Kim Kafwan, the first Taiwan Do and first Korean character in fighting games. This game also introduced Mai Shiranui, who would also go on to become one of SNK's major mascots, as well as one of the most well-known female video game characters. However, this is not a title that I have in my collection. Instead, I have Fatal Fury Special, which is an updated version of Fatal Fury 2, including changes to the gameplay system, while also expanding the available character roster. Some of the changes to the gameplay included a faster game speed and an all-new combo system. Unlike in the previous Fatal Fury games, Special allows the players to combine their attacks. When an attack lands, the player will have a brief moment of invincibility. The number of line move attacks is also increased. Pressing the light punch or light kick button while an opponent is on an opposite line will perform a low line jump attack. The single player mode has the player fighting all of the playable characters, beginning with the 8 regular characters from Fatal Fury 2, as well as Tongue and Duck. If the player wins all 15 matches in 2 rounds, the player will then be challenged by Ryu in a special dream match. This crossover of including Ryo from the Art of Fighting series is said to have inspired SNK to create the King of Fighters series, the first entry of which was released a year after Fatal Fury Special. This game again received very positive reviews from critics and gamers alike. Some publications praise the variety of characters, the addition of new moves for the older characters, the combos, detailed graphics, and humorous touches to the backgrounds. However, some felt the ability to jump between the foreground and the background tended to be more of an annoyance than a feature. One thing I've seen repeated from game reviews both on the past and present is that the appearance of Fatal Fury Special really negates the reason to play Fatal Fury 2. This is Fatal Fury 2, but better. And I'm stuck here thinking, what can I really say to add to that opinion? I really do think that Fatal Fury Special is that. It is definitely the better version of the first 3 games in this series. And I would definitely recommend a pickup, as this is the first time this game really feels like it can seriously compete with other game fighting franchises. As for if it's necessary to own on the Neo Geo, there is a special place in my heart for this because this is the native system it was developed for, but this has also been developed for a myriad of other systems, including the Super Nintendo, to the Sega CD and Game Gear. I will say that the Neo Geo guarantees you a good experience, but if you buy a port for another console, just beware that there are a couple out there that were not well received. For example, back in the day, GamePro said that the Sega CD version was yet another of Neo Geo's games ported poorly to a different system. And the version for the Super Nintendo has been criticized for its high difficulty in pulling off some of the fighting moves. I can't personally say myself because I haven't played either of those 2 versions yet, but I would venture a guess that the Neo Geo version is going to be the best. And unlike the previous games in the series, there was a gap of 2 years before Fatal Fury 3 Road to the Final Victory would release on the Neo Geo. Even though it's called Fatal Fury 3, this is the 4th game in the series, and this game picks up 3 years after the events of Fatal Fury 2 and Special. The plot of this game involves a disturbing revelation that Geese Howard is supposedly still alive, having survived after his fatal fall from his personal tower 4 years ago, and faking his death to the public so that he could slowly recover, in secret, and plan his revenge. The gameplay of Fatal Fury 3 retains the format and controls of the previous game in the series. However, the 2-plane battle stages have been revamped into a 3-plane format known as the Oversway system. The player fights primarily in the middle plane or the main plane, but can move or oversway into either of the sway lanes in the background or the foreground. When the player performs an attack in the sway lane, their character will return to the main plane. Other new techniques introduced in this installment includes controlling the height of the character's jump, blocking an opponent's attack in mid-air, and a new type of combo technique known as combination arts, allowing the player to cancel a specific series of regular attacks from one to the other. In addition to the special moves and super special moves, each character also has a hidden ability, which is a stronger version of a super special move. A hidden ability only occurs once in every 1024 chances whenever the player inputs the command for a character's super special move. However, it can also be used by activating Super Mode before the match using a secret code. Entering this code only allows you to use it once per round. The game also features a fighting level system when fighting against the computer, so when the player finishes a round, their performance is graded from E to S. The final opponent the player faces at the end of single-player mode is determined then by the player's average. This game was received positively by gamers and critics, however some felt that the game lacked the feel of a Fatal Fury game. Many agreed that the game was still playable and probably worth playing at least once or twice. However, when looking back on this game, it has not been as positively reviewed, with one person making the argument that if it wasn't for the difficulty in executing the superpower moves, Fatal Fury 3 would have become the leading game in the arcades. In terms of the first games we've covered so far in this series, this one has been the least positively reviewed. And to tell you the truth, my personal opinion is that Fatal Fury Special is still the better title. And this is one I don't really see myself coming back to, so unless you're going for a complete collection or you're a real big fan of this series, I would say you can skip this one.
Fatal Fury 3! Road to the Final Victory.
So out of the first 4 games that were released in this series, the one that I have in my collection is Fatal Fury. Well, actually, I actually couldn't tell because it's in Japanese writing. I don't know if it is Fatal Fury 2 or Fatal Fury Special. It's one of those two. But I would definitely recommend collecting Fatal Fury Special if you wanted to collect any of these titles for your system. I think that one's going to provide you with the most enjoyment. If you can get more, get Fatal Fury 3, and then get Fatal Fury 1. And then if you're going for complete, obviously, I would save Fatal Fury 2 for last. But as the series would continue, they would kind of take the title in a different direction.
Real Bout Fatal Fury also came out the same year as Fatal Fury 3 in 1995. The game retains the character roster from Fatal Fury 3, with the boss characters now being a part of the regular cast. Also, Duck King, Billy Kane, and Kim Kafwan, who are all last featured in Fatal Fury Special, are added to the roster. And, spoiler alert, the series antagonist, Geese Howard, reprises his role from the original Fatal Fury game as this game's final boss. What's different about this game is that they changed the play controls a bit, reducing the number of attack buttons back down from 4 to 3, including a standard punch and kick, as well as a strong attack button, which can be used in conjunction for a stronger punch or kick, and that depends on the character. The game retains the 3-plane oversway system from Fatal Fury 3, but Real Bout introduces a power gauge which fills up as the player performs normal or special techniques against their opponent, or defend themselves, similar to many special move gauges featured in other fighting games. The power gauge allows players to perform one of 3 special techniques, depending on the level of the power gauge. When the power gauge is half full and colored yellow, the player can perform guard cancels. When the power gauge reaches max level while the player still has more than half of their life gauge remaining, then the power gauge will enter into S power level. At that point, the energy in the power gauge will begin to deplete gradually, and during that time, the player can perform guard cancels or a super special move. However, once the super special move is performed, the remaining energy in the power gauge will be consumed, and the power gauge will return to its initial state. If the power gauge reaches max level while the player has less than half of their life gauge remaining, then the power gauge will enter into a P power level. In this mode, the power gauge will drain, but the entire time the player will have infinite access to both guard cancels and super special moves, at least until the power gauge runs out. Real Bout also introduces stages with ring outs, a gameplay feature previously introduced in 3D fighting games such as Virtua Fighter, but the out-of-bounds areas are guarded by barriers. If a fighter's attack forces an opponent to hit a barrier enough times, then the barrier is destroyed, and a fighter can win by knocking the opponent out of bounds. This game was very positively received by critics and gamers since its release, with at least one game publication noting that it was a major improvement over Fatal Fury 3, specifically stating that the characters were better, the more refined combo system was good, and the inclusion of moves that were taken out of previous games were a nice addition. Some were critical of reducing the number of buttons down to 3, as well as being critical of the reuse of the series' antagonist making a return in this game, and some were even critical of the game's soundtrack, which I have to say I didn't really notice, but I guess I didn't really care for it one way or the other. Overall, I did find myself enjoying this game, although I do have a special place for Fatal Fury Special. I feel like this title is a worthy successor.
Fatal Fury.
Real Bout Fatal Fury Special came out 2 years later in 1997. It is the 6th installment in the Fatal Fury series and the second game in the Real Bout sub-series. This game features all new graphics and returns to a 2-level playing system from Fatal Fury 2. This game retains the cast from the original Real Bout, with the addition of a few new characters from Fatal Fury Special. The final boss from Fatal Fury Special also makes a return, however Geese Howard from the very first one can also be found as a hidden final boss in a special Nightmare match. The game also features extra hidden versions of some of the other game characters, for a total of 23 characters, or 24 if you have a version that includes Geese as a playable character. The gameplay is similar, however ring outs have been removed from this game, and instead, when you use a character to break a barrier, they just become stunned. I've seen reviews of this game go between 7 or 8 out of 10, stating that it's a worthy successor to Real Bout, but overall it doesn't really offer anything too unique to make it stand out. Real Bout Fatal Fury 2 The Newcomers was released in 1998 by SNK for the Neo Geo, serving as the 7th game in the series and the 3rd in the Real Bout sub-series. This game uses the same graphics as the Real Bout Fatal Fury Special, but returns to the same fighting system of the original Real Bout. The character roster from Real Bout Special returns, including Geese Howard, who is now a normally selectable character and serves as one of the standard final bosses. The extra versions of some of the main characters introduced in Fatal Fury Special, though, are removed, with 2 new characters being introduced. Out of the Real Bout series, I've seen this game being reviewed as the best in this sub-series, with reviews ranging from 8 out of 10 to a perfect 10 out of 10, with one reviewer noting that, while Real Bout Fatal Fury 2 was not the significant upgrade some Neo Geo fans were expecting, it does exactly what the final release in a series should do by taking everything good from past releases and basically just polishing it up a bit. And while I agree with that, this would not actually be the final game in the series, but it would be the final one to feature the Fatal Fury name. Overall, I would recommend this as the only title to own out of the Real Bout series, and I would also recommend Fatal Fury Special, being kind of the essential 2 to own.
Fatal
Fatal Fury 2, The Newcomers.
So out of the 3 games released under the Real Bout series, I would recommend Real Bout 2, The Newcomers, just because I feel like that's the one where they finally polished out the gameplay in this series. Now sadly, the next title was not released on the Neo Geo, and that's because by this point in the 1990s, people were looking for a different arcade experience, and there were already a lot of other 2D fighters that SNK was putting out on their platform, and people were starting to become very critical of why don't you just make a 3D game? So they did, but it had to be on different hardware. The only home port of this that I know of is on the Sony PlayStation, so let's go ahead and take a look at that.
The next game in the series would be Fatal Fury Wild Ambition, and this game would take the series in a different direction, making it a 3D fighting game. It was one of, if not the last game released for the Hyper Neo Geo 64 system board. However, I am playing this game on its PlayStation home port. This game actually retells the story of the original Fatal Fury game. And although this is a 3D fighting game, the gameplay is similar to that of a 2D fighting game. The button layout for the controls are similar to Real Bout Fatal Fury 2, but it includes a new move called the Axis Shift. This feature allows players to move their characters left or right using 3D movement. Otherwise, the rest of the moves are kind of similar to Real Bout Fatal Fury 2. However, this game does replace the power meter with the heat meter. When the player fills the heat meter, the message Max OK will appear, and then players may perform an overdrive power or a heat blow. Using either move will cause the heat meter to go to close to empty. And when this happens, a danger message will appear. Because if the player takes too much damage with a nearly empty heat meter, the player will overheat, causing the player to get dizzy and become vulnerable to the opponent's attack. A new feature introduced in this game allows the player to block an attack at the moment it hits, which causes no damage. Overall, the PlayStation version of this game got mixed reviews, and I've seen this game ranked at about a 5 or 6 out of 10. And sadly, I must agree with that assessment. This isn't really a game that I would find myself ever coming back to, as there's no real draw to me. I think this game was better done on the Neo Geo, and the 3D graphics don't really add anything for me. So again, I must reserve this to hardcore collectors or hardcore fans of the Fatal Fury series.
Now, it's been a while since I've looked up the price, but this one was not too expensive to collect, so for me trying to showcase it in this video, it didn't really cost me a lot, but I actually kind of feel like it was not worth it to me to even collect this. It is not the best 3D fighting game in the world, and because there's other ones that you should play on the PlayStation before this one, I would definitely not recommend it unless you're a real big fan of this series, and you want to see the only 3D fighting game in this series. I would give this one a pass. Now, you may think that we're done, but there's actually 2 titles I haven't talked about yet. One came out for the Neo Geo Pocket Color, and it is kind of a remix of Real Bout Fatal Fury 2, so I'm not really going to include that in this list because, again, it's just kind of a port of this game, and I'm not going to cover all of the ports, so it would just take way too much time. But the final game in this series is actually called Garou, Mark of the Wolves, and I've been told that this is one of the best 2D fighting games that SNK ever made, so that kind of sets a high standard to beat. Let's see how it measures up.
And this sadly leads me to the 9th and final installment of the Fatal Fury series, called Garou, Mark of the Wolves. This game introduces multiple changes to the franchise, including replacing the series' main hero, Terry Bogard, with a new character, Rock Howard. Terry would still remain in the game, however he would get a facelift as they felt his appearance was a bit dated. The game takes place 10 years after the crime lord Geese Howard's death, with the city of Southtown becoming very peaceful. A new fighting tournament called King of Fighters Maximum Mayhem starts in the area, and several characters related with the fighters from the previous King of Fighters tournaments participate in it. And because a lot of Japanese fighting games love family drama, Rock Howard is the son of Geese Howard, and the protege of Terry Bogard. His fighting style combines the techniques of both Terry and Geese, giving him an edge on both offense and defense. In terms of gameplay, the two-plane system in which characters would fight from two different planes was removed from this game. Instead, the game introduces the Tactical Offense Position, which is a special area on the life gauge. When the gauge reaches this area, the character enters into the Top mode, granting the player's character the ability to use a top attack, gradual life recovery, and increased attack damage. The game also introduces the Just Defend system, which rewards the player who successfully blocks an attack at the last moment with a small amount of health recovery, and the ability to immediately counterattack out of block stun. Similar to previous games, you are given a rank at the end of each match, and if the player manages to win all rounds from the arcade mode with at least a AAA rank, they will face off against the boss, Kane Heinlein. If that criteria is not met, then there will be a different final boss and there will be no special endings to the game. This game was originally released only for Japanese arcades on November 26, 1999. It was ported to the AES on February 25, 2000, and it made its way to the Dreamcast on September 21, 2001. The original Dreamcast version was the only one released in North America on November 23, 2001, being one of the last games released for the Dreamcast here in North America, where it was renamed Fatal Fury: Mark of the Wolves. This game was named GameSpot's Fighting Game of the Year in 2001, and it was nominated for its annual Best Game No One Played and Best Dreamcast Game, but would lose to Victorious Boxers and Phantasy Star Online. This game has received several positive reviews from critics, and I've seen it go around 7 to 8 out of 10 on its game ratings, and although I personally enjoyed playing it on the Neo Geo, it is quite expensive to collect for that system, and I would definitely recommend giving it a pickup on Sega Dreamcast if you're serious about collecting this title. If you don't mind a digital-only copy, there is a version of this game that was released for the PlayStation 4 by SNK, and it would probably be your cheapest option for collecting this game. Overall, not a bad way for this series to bow out.
Garou, Mark of the Wolves.
Garou Mark of the Wolves is a very visually stunning game. As you can tell by the intro screen there where it says Gigapower, this was definitely kind of showcasing the maximum power that the Neo Geo could put out. The problem with collecting this game is it is one of those very expensive, multi-$1,000 games that you would have to pay to collect this for your system. However, the much cheaper option I decided to go with was to get it for the Sega Dreamcast. Now, to tell you the truth, I was actually unaware that Garou Mark of the Wolves had a North American release, but it was one of the last North American titles released for the Sega Dreamcast, and I assumed that was going to create a higher demand or higher value of the game. However, this is a chance for me to show off a new console I added to my collection this year, and that is a Japanese Sega Dreamcast. Japanese games are region-locked on the Dreamcast unless you want to do some modifications to your system, so I decided to get an authentic Japanese Dreamcast so I can play some of the exclusives that didn't make it over, and some of them are cheaper, although in some cases I think they're about the same price or even more expensive in Japan. So this was one of the first games I got for it, knowing that it was very expensive on the Neo Geo. And even though I'm not doing a direct comparison between the Dreamcast and the Neo Geo port, I will say that they are virtually identical, except for the fact that the Dreamcast has loading times, just like the Neo CD would have had. But overall, I would say if you can get this for your Sega Dreamcast, it is definitely worth a pickup, as it is one of the better titles in this series, and I think a good farewell to Fatal Fury. That said, that is going to wrap things up for this video. Again, if you like what you see, please give this video a like. Let me know in the comments below what you liked about this video, and if you've played any of the Fatal Fury games and which one is your favorite. As always, I want to thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.
If you like this video and you'd like to help out with future projects on this channel, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Also, if you enjoy the content of this channel, please remember to click on this subscribe button. Again, I want to thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.